Hi, I'm Tony Northrup, and this is a free tutorial for the Canon 6D Mark II. This is a monster video, but don't worry, you don't have to watch the whole thing. Check the description and you'll find a table of contents that will allow you to jump past the parts you already know or to review the parts that you don't yet know. You can also use the YouTube player on most playback devices to change my speed. So you can speed me up or slow me down a little bit depending on whether you think I talk too fast or too slow. I strongly suggest you pick up your camera and work alongside me. Everything I do, you do, because so much of learning happens with muscle memory. Your hands, you'll just retain it that much better. If you want to share a camera tutorial with your friends, share sdp.io/tutorials, because there we have an index of all the tutorials that we have for just about every major modern camera. First, let's talk about the battery on this camera. It's the Canon E6N batteries. You'll see it just goes right in the bottom there and slides back in. The contacts will go towards the center of the body. Notice what I've done here is I've written down the date on this particular battery. We have a bunch of cameras. These batteries last, they probably lose half their capacity in a year or a year and a half. So if you keep this camera for a couple of years, you'll probably end up replacing the battery at some point, and it gets confusing to know which is the new battery, which is the old battery. So for that reason, I write in permanent marker on the back when we get any particular battery in. These batteries will generally last you several days. You could take a 4-day trip and I'd be comfortable generally traveling with a single battery unless you start using live view, Wi-Fi, GPS, and frankly, you probably are going to be using those things. In that case, you might want to pack an extra battery. You can pick one up at sdp.io/e6n. If you shop around, you will find a lot of third-party generic batteries. Some people report success with these, but we've tested 4 different types maybe, and they work great for a period of a couple of months. And that's when people write their 5-star reviews. But then after that point, they will fail suddenly. And if your pictures are at all important to you, you do not want to have spent weeks setting up a beautiful shoot just to have your battery suddenly die like that. It'll go from all the bars to no bars. So I strongly suggest sticking with the original Canon batteries. However, if you travel and you want to be able to recharge it regularly, I would suggest getting a USB charger for your batteries. This will allow you to charge it from, the USB port in your car or an airplane or one of those USB banks, and it'll just make it easier to charge as you go. It also means you don't have to carry around that big USB, the big battery charger that Canon shipped you with that long cable. You can pick one up at sdp.io/Canon USB. These are affiliate links. We get a few pennies out of every dollar. It just helps pay for this studio and everything. Now that you got the battery going and maybe you got yourself an extra battery, let's talk about the lens a little bit. Line up the red dot on the lens with the red dot on the body. Twist them clockwise until it clicks, and then just wiggle the lens to make sure it's in there solid. You don't want it falling off. Couple of things to note. On the lens, you'll see an AF/MF switch. If for some reason it seems like your camera's not focusing, sometimes this switch gets hit automatic or accidentally. So just make sure it's on AF at all times. You might also have an IS for image stabilization switch. You pretty much can just leave that on all the time and not worry about it, but just things to double check. Let's talk about the ports really briefly on this camera. Over on the left side, you'll see a jack for a 1/8" mic here. It is not the type of microphone that you would use with your smartphone. It's a more standard type of microphone that it takes. There's another little rubber cover here for a USB port. That's a USB 2 port, kind of an old style USB port, and then a mini HDMI out. The USB port could be used to transfer images from your camera to your computer. It cannot be used to charge the camera. That's why I suggested that USB battery charger a second ago. The mini HDMI out, you could use that to connect to a TV or a field recorder. You might hook it up to a TV if you want to do a slideshow with your friends directly from your camera, but it's not really how people consume pictures nowadays. They'd probably rather you just put it on social media, but the theory is there. And if you are using a field recorder, you probably already know how to do that, so I won't go into any more detail. The SD card is your digital film. Pull this door towards you, it'll pop open like that, and then your SD card goes in, push it in until it clicks, and then when you're ready to take it back out, push it and it'll pop back out. The label faces towards you. When you close the door, you'll see the red light lights up. It'll light up anytime the camera is saving images to the SD card, so just don't take the SD card out while it's doing that. The camera does not support UHS 2 SD cards. UHS 2 is just a newer, more expensive standard. So that's good news. You can just get a standard UHS 1 SD card from sdp.io/SD. You'll find cards there at all different price points. I would suggest going for a higher capacity card. I'm using a 256 gig card here, and that's not too big. You can take thousands and thousands of pictures, but if you were able to shoot for a couple of years, that'd actually be pretty convenient because you could just keep shooting and know that you always had a backup of the last year's pictures on your camera in case something happened to your tablet or computer or wherever you were storing them. And you'll thank me if you've followed my advice on this, but visit this link and get yourself the cheapest SD card you could find, like a handful of them. You can get, maybe an 8 gig card for $10. Get 5 of those, put one in your briefcase, one in your lunchbox, one in your purse or your wife's purse, or put it in, your desk at work and the bag on your bicycle. That way, if you forget your memory card at home or you fill up your memory card, you'll have that emergency memory card there, because that will happen inevitably. And when it does, you'll think, oh, thanks, Tony. He told me to spend $10 and get some cheap insurance. You don't necessarily have to use those SD cards only in computers. Nowadays, I actually find I get better performance using Lightroom Mobile on an Android or iPhone tablet, though you can use Adobe Lightroom, my favorite editing software, on a PC too. Most computers have an SD card reader in them, but if you do want to read them into your phone or tablet, especially for sharing while you're traveling, you can get SD card readers for those devices pretty cheap. The Android ones are like $5. Pick it up at sdp.io/AndroidSD, and the Apple ones are more expensive, maybe $35. Pick it up at sdp.io/AppleSD. I would suggest using the Lightroom mobile app, which is free at least to install, though you might want a subscription for it too. And that will be able to read in your JPEG or RAW files, process them on your phone, and share them really quickly. You'd be shocked how fast it is. It's actually faster than even a high-end PC. If you do like Lightroom Mobile, you can get the desktop app, and with Adobe's Creative Cloud service, it will automatically synchronize from your phone to your computer, and I find that works really well. You can pick that up at sdp.io/Adobe Deal. Now, your camera has a couple of modes before we actually start shooting, and when you get your camera, it's going to be in this green, totally automatic mode, and we're not going to use that anymore. This is for people who don't have any idea how to use their camera. So if you want somebody to take a picture of you, go ahead and put it in that green mode, because they don't know how to use your camera. But you know a little bit about your camera now, or at least you're going to. So we're going to push this button in the middle here. This is your mode dial. Push that button in and then turn it over to the P. P is automatic, but not restrained, because in the green mode, the camera is going to hide a whole bunch of options for you. So P is just better. Let's start by just taking a picture using Live View. Live View uses the back screen here. So to activate that, this switch here, make sure the little white arrow is pointed towards the camera icon, and then hit the Start Stop button. This will turn on the back screen. So now it's going to work a lot like your smartphone. You can just basically touch the screen there, and it'll focus for you. And then when you're ready to take the picture, this is your shutter button. Pushing the shutter button down halfway focuses, and then pushing it down all the way takes a picture. You can hear it take a picture there. Now, there's lots of different information that you can view on this Live View. To change the information that you see, hit the Info button here. So I'll hit that, and now you can see it shows me some additional information. Push it again, it shows me more information. Push it again, I can see a histogram. You can get a level on there too. If you want to be able to take pictures by just touching the screen, hit the Info button until you see this little icon down here. Push that, and now you can see it says Touch Shutter Enable, and now I can take a picture just by... So now you have a very smartphone-esque style. You could even take selfies by, say, flipping this screen out here, and now you can hold it out here to actually see yourself. And look, I can work the shutter. Bam, look, got a selfie with me and Justin. Pretty sweet. One note about this Live View screen, it's really convenient that it flips out here. You can protect it by flipping the screen that way, and then you can throw it in your bag. You don't have to worry about the screen getting scratched or anything. Flip it out. If you're shooting on a tripod down low, you can flip it like this, or you could tilt it the other way and shoot over a crowd using Live View like that. And of course, I just showed you selfies. It's super versatile. Right sudden, that back screen is going to be difficult to see. Most of the time, you'll want to be using the viewfinder for that, and I'll show you how to use the viewfinder in just a bit. But you can also increase the brightness of the screen to make it easier to see. To do that, hit the menu button up here. This will open up our menu system. And we're going to go to the wrench. You can see there's all different tabs for the menus up here. You can scroll through it with your fingers. The menu we want for now is the wrench icon, and then page 2 of that, you'll see LCD brightness here. And now we can just drag that brightness up or down. For the sun, going all the way with the brightness is not too much. Just keep that in mind if you're having a hard time seeing it. Now I'll show you how to take a picture with the viewfinder. This is the viewfinder here. It's the more traditional, old-fashioned way of doing it. It has some severe disadvantages, like it won't show you a histogram. It won't show you if your picture's underexposed or overexposed. But nonetheless, it does work. You cannot use the viewfinder while you have live view going here. So if I put my eye to the viewfinder now, it's completely black. So you have to turn off live view by hitting that. Now, when you look through the viewfinder, you'll be able to see stuff. And otherwise, taking a picture is basically the same. You'll hold it up to your eye. You won't use the touch screen. You'll push the shutter halfway. It'll focus, and then you'll push the button all the way to actually take a picture. I showed you that in live view, the info button would change the information that was displayed. The info button does not change the information displayed in the viewfinder. If you want to change the information in the viewfinder, hit that menu button, go to the wrench icon, page 2, and then go down to viewfinder display right down here. And now you can choose to show the electronic level, which is a really, really useful feature because I've never taken an on-level picture in camera. It doesn't matter if you think you have stuff level, you get just a little tilty all the time. So when you turn on that electronic level, you can hold your eye up to the viewfinder and you'll see it up at the top of the frame. And it'll kind of tell you if you're tilty left or right. And I bet most of the time you're tilty. Another thing you can change with that same menu item down here is to pick the Show Hide in Viewfinder option. And now you can choose which data you see while you have the viewfinder up. And which of this information you want to see is totally up to you. I definitely prefer to err on the side of having less information in there. I don't need all these icons distracting me from the process of taking a picture. Battery life is so good that you don't really need to worry about it. Things like the mode are displayed on the top LCD screen or on the mode dial here. But feel free to turn those on if you want them and if the distraction isn't detracting from the experience for you. Real quickly, I want to show you how to use the incredibly versatile Q button. The Q button on the back screen here allows you to change most settings that you will need to change. And it allows you to do it without memorizing where the buttons are or searching around for a particular button. So pop this open and we'll cover exposure compensation in a bit. But if you forget where to do it, you can just do that and then drag it up or down like that. Really convenient. Hit the back button here. If you wanted to change your ISO, you could do that and then just drag it like that. Change your image quality. Whatever it is, I'm just telling you, the Q button is extremely convenient. While you're using the viewfinder, you might find that it's not crystal clear. If you're a glasses wearer, you can adjust the diopter to allow you to take your glasses off and look through the viewfinder. Some people prefer to wear glasses while they use the viewfinder, others prefer to take it off. Either way, you should do this at least once. Hold the camera up to your eye and turn this dial until everything is sharp. This is like when you go to the eye doctor and they're like, better here, better here. Activate the camera by depressing the shutter halfway and don't look through the lens, but look at the numbers at the bottom of the display and turn that diopter until those are nice and sharp. One of the most common questions I get from people is, why won't my camera focus? And often the reason that they think it's not focusing is because the diopter got accidentally hit, which would be basically dialing in the wrong glasses prescription. So everything would look blurry in the viewfinder. If it seems like your camera won't focus, if everything is blurry, especially those numbers at the bottom, hold it up to your eye and turn that diopter. If you share the camera with somebody else, you might have different diopter settings, so they could be a little baffled when they pick up your camera and they can't see anything because it's all blurry. Let's talk about how to take a quick video. This dial here switches between still photo mode and video mode. The little red camera icon there is video. So for video, switch that down like that. The viewfinder does not work in video. It is always black. You will always have to use the back screen here. Starting recording is as easy as pushing the start/stop button here, and it will start recording. And that's pretty much all you have to do to get a basic video. However, there are lots of options for you. I'll say this camera has an excellent autofocus system during video. So I'm recording now, I can touch the screen here and have it focus there, and then I can touch the screen there and have it focus in the background. And it's actually pretty cinematic. It'll do a great job of just pulling focus back and forth. Now, there are a ton of video settings that you can change. So what I want to suggest is turning on the digital image stabilization. To get there, I'm going to be in video mode, and then I'm going to hit the menu button here. And I'm going to get different settings from those that I had when I was in still mode. And if we go down to select the camera icon and then page 5, you'll see Movie Digital IS, which is image stabilization. And you can just pick enabled for that. And that will take out some of the camera shake. You can see it smooths it out a little bit. If you're using the camera handheld, or especially if you're walking with it, that will really smooth out the video without you having to do any post-processing. If you have the camera on a tripod though, you'll probably want to go in and turn that off so that, because Digital IS has to crop the image in a little bit. I want to show you how to change a couple of video settings. You'll do that by hitting the menu button here. And over on the first page here, you can see movie recording size. By default, the camera uses 1080p, which is like full HD, at 2997 frames per second, which is basically 30 frames a second. My favorite setting is definitely 1080p at 60 frames a second. 60 frames a second is great because it smooths everything out. It makes everything look more lifelike. 60 frames a second also allows you to slow things down half speed. So you could do nice, smooth, slow motion that just looks fantastic. So if you want the highest quality possible, switch to that setting. Another setting you might want to change is the sound recording here. Auto is fine for most purposes, but if you're serious about your video, you'll probably go in and set this to manual. And then you'll adjust the recording level up or down until the sound is, well, this is actually pretty good, but you don't ever want it to be peaking. So you'll adjust the levels up and down until it's not quite peaking. The problem that you'll get when you use auto sound recording is that in quiet moments, the camera will crank the volume up. So in between my sentences, the volume will come up and like, and I start talking again, and the background noise will just disappear, and it can be kind of maddening to listen to. So I do suggest using manual, especially if you're plugging in an external microphone. And I will suggest a microphone for you. I'm wearing a lav mic now. I'm wearing a different lav mic, but the lav mic I'm wearing does not include a headphone jack. So I'm going to suggest these kind of expensive Sony lav mics that we use most of the time when we're in the field, because the 6D Mark II does not have a headphone jack on it, and which means you can't listen to your sound, and sound is important when recording video. It's maybe more important than the quality of the video, in fact. If you get these Sony lav mics at sdp.io/SonyLav, they have a headphone jack, so you can listen to the audio coming directly from the wireless lavalier receiver. Then just put the lav, like I'm wearing here, put that on whoever you're recording, and you'll get great quality sound that you can actually monitor. Let's talk about how to record a video time-lapse. Time-lapses are just, it shows in a few seconds something that happened over the course of minutes or hours. It's just sped up a whole lot. Often they're used for really wide cityscapes or starscapes, and I see them used all the time in TVs and movies now, especially as establishing shots. So if you're making your own videos, video time-lapses are a fantastic way to really up the production value without too much work. If you ever watch Casey Neistat, he's got tons of video time-lapses. While you're in video mode, you can set up a video time-lapse, hit the menu button here, and then go down to the camera icon, page 5. You will have to turn off Digital IS, but then you can see the option for time-lapse movie. So I'll select that, and then I can set enable, and you can see it can do 4K video time-lapses. I would definitely do 4K video time-lapses. Even if you plan to publish in 1080p, having the 4K format will improve your image quality if you scale it down, or it will allow you to slowly like zoom in and pan around, which can add a lot of life to the time-lapse in post. Anyway, there's no real penalty to having a 4K time-lapse except a bigger file format. So set that, and then set your interval and your number of shots. Generally, if you're unsure, a shorter interval is going to be better. Time-lapses are kind of an art. if you're publishing at 60 frames a second, you would need 60 pictures to have 1 second of video. And I always want to have at least 10 seconds of video, which means I would always want at least 600 shots. Or if I'm publishing at 30 frames a second, at least 300 shots. The way I would normally do a time lapse would just be to set the number of shots to some super high value, higher than I might even intend to actually use, just because I can always stop it. But I usually want to let the time lapse run just as long as it possibly can, because it's going to be running for minutes or possibly hours. So I don't necessarily want to be like watching the camera. Sometimes it'll just be pointed out the room of a hotel if I happen to have a nice view. So with all that set, once you have the time lapse enabled like that, you can just hit the menu button to go back. And then when you actually start recording, you can see it's going to prompt you to check the recording. And you can use the shutter to take a test shot. But then when you're ready to create your time-lapse movie, you'll just hit the start stop button right there. There we go. So now it's recording the time lapse. And at some period of time when I decide that it's done, I can stop it by pushing the shutter button. There's another way to record time lapses. That will actually generate a video file for you. So it is immediately ready to be dropped into your video editor or to share. You can also shoot raw time lapses that take still images that you could then process in your photo editor, Adobe Lightroom, something like that. It doesn't generate a video file. Instead, it will generate hundreds and hundreds of still pictures that you'll have to blend into a time lapse, which is easy to do. To do that, you'll take the switch here and you'll flip it over into the still camera mode. See the little camera icon there. You'll hit the menu button here. You go to the camera icon, page 4. You can see the top option here is interval timer. I'll enable that. And then to change these settings, it's different than the other page. It's terribly confusing. Hit the info button. So now we put the same information in just a completely different user interface. Set your interval and the number of shots. You can scroll down to go to unlimited. There we go. That's usually what I would do, unlimited like that, and click OK. And now you can see it shows, you have to click OK. You can't just close out of it. Now you can see it's showing that the interval timer is enabled. So the next time I go to take a picture, it's going to do that repeatedly. What I like to do is to set my alarm in the morning when I'm in a hotel or something to go off, half an hour before sunrise, an hour before sunrise. I'll set the camera up the night before, so it's all ready to go, and then I'll set an alarm to go so that all I have to do is go and start the time lapse, and then have it just take pictures through sunrise, and then I can go ahead and sleep until an hour after sunrise, which is what I normally do, and I would have my time lapse ready and waiting for me there. If you're going to do star trails, the thing about star trails is you're usually doing a 30-second exposure, and you want it to be shooting continuously with no delay between images. You could do it with the interval timer, but I find that there's always a bit of a delay with the interval timer, which is okay for most time lapses, but not okay for star trails. For that, I like to use an external shutter trigger, like this $10 device that will just lock the shutter open. I would put the camera into continuous shutter mode. If you're unsure how to do that, remember the Q button can do just about everything for you. I'll hit the Q button, and then, wait, instead of one shot here, I'll hit the Q button, and then when you see this little box there, tap that, and then you can pick low speed or high speed continuous. Either way would be the same thing. Select that mode, and then use this to lock the shutter open, and the camera will just shoot continuously. For detailed information about how to take star trail time lapses, check chapter 11 in my book, Stunning Digital Photography, over here. You can just look it up on Amazon. Let's talk about enabling the GPS. First, I'm going to switch over to Lightroom here and show you how cool the GPS can be. You can see in this map here, it shows the global map, and wherever people have taken pictures, it shows a little icon, and then I can just touch one of these and it will show me all the pictures that were taken in that particular location. GPS is super cool when combined with an app like Lightroom. Canon includes an app with this camera that can show you where your pictures were taken, but the Canon app is terrible. So do check out Adobe Lightroom. To turn on GPS, you go into the menu icon here again, and it's under the wrench icon on page 3. Right at the top there, you'll see GPS settings. So I'll select that, and then I will select mode 1, which is usually right. Mode 1 works even when the camera is turned off. Mode 2 works only when the camera is on. Select GPS settings at the top here, and it will give you a choice of disabling it, which means you won't get any GPS data, or Mode 1 and Mode 2. Mode 1 uses a little more battery, and Mode 2 uses a little less battery, but maybe won't update as frequently, so it might get the location wrong, or it might not get a location for some of your pictures. If you're religious about carrying an extra battery and charging it up every night and you're not worried about battery power, definitely just use Mode 1 here. Auto time setting, right below that, is something you probably do want to turn on. That's terribly useful. It will talk to the global satellite network and figure out what time it is and set it, because I hate it when the camera's time gets off. You can also change the position update interval. This is how often the camera is going to take a moment and talk to the GPS signals. This is going to burn a little more battery. If you do it every second, you can be driving at 60 miles an hour and it will very precisely pinpoint your location in all of your photos, but it will burn through a bunch more batteries. If you do it every 5 minutes or so, if you're just walking around town, well, you could definitely be a few blocks off in the course of 5 minutes, so that might be a little slow. But if you know that you're doing landscape photography and you're just going to be hanging out at a position for an hour, every 5 minutes might be okay. So a compromise somewhere between every second and every 5 minutes, choosing between how accurate you want to be and how much batteries you want to actually burn. If you just want to see what your GPS signals are like, you can hit the GPS information display, and I'm underground in our secret studios here, so it's not actually getting any signals. I strongly recommend turning GPS on and just forgetting about it, because if you try to remember to turn it on the next time you're out shooting because you're trying to save batteries or something, you're gonna forget. So just turn the GPS on, but use Mode 2 and use an infrequent update cycle so that the batteries don't completely burn out while it's sitting in your closet. One of the biggest complaints that people have had about this particular camera is its lack of dynamic range in RAW. So I can propose a very easy solution, and that is to enable bracketing. Bracketing, first, dynamic range is the ability of a camera to recover the brightest of brights and the deepest of shadows and show detail in each. And it's actually a really useful feature, because so many times when you're taking a picture of your friends or family, they're in shade, or the sun is behind them and the sky is super bright, but their faces are completely in shadow. And we've all taken those pictures where you can see the sky and the clouds perfectly, but the people are just a silhouette and you can barely see their face. A good dynamic range can allow you to completely fix that in post-processing. And this camera, that's not one of its strong points. An easy way to compensate for that is to enable bracketing. So I'll show you how to do that. To turn on bracketing, go into the menu system here, and then we're going to go into the camera icon, and then page 2. And you can see exposure compensation AEB. That is auto exposure bracketing. So to change the auto exposure bracketing, use the main dial up here, this dial right here next to the shutter button, and I'm just twisting it. And you can see it's making these little red lines that are going to indicate what my exposure is going to be. And because there are 3 lines here, that means it's going to take 3 pictures. One that is 2 stops underexposed, that means it's gathering 1/4 of the light, or 2 stops overexposed, a picture that's gathering 4 times the amount of light that it thinks it needs, plus one that's just a regular exposure. So now that the bracketing is turned on, I have to hit the OK down here, or it will forget my bracketing setting. So let's just demonstrate that. I will use the touch shooting here. And I took 3 pictures. So you can see what happened. The first picture was the proper exposure, the second picture was too dark, and the third picture was brighter. So either I could pick the picture that was the exposure that I liked the best, or I could go into an app like Adobe Lightroom. Adobe Lightroom allows you to select those 3 pictures. You can right-click them, select Photo Merge, and then choose Merge to HDR. And it will automatically blend them together, choosing the best parts of each of the 3 exposures, completely solving your dynamic range problem. So when people tell you this camera doesn't have great dynamic range, tell them, no sweat, I know how to use bracketing. It's super easy. There are a couple of bracketing options that you should know about under the Custom Functions menu. So I'll go into the menu system here, the first thing after you're done with bracketing, you probably want to go in and turn it off, because you'll forget that you have bracketing on, and then the next time you go to take pictures, it's going to be changing the exposure crazily on you. So use it and then turn it off. Under the custom functions, which is that icon right there, under custom function 1, exposure, let's go down to number 5. We have to scroll through it a little differently. Number 5 under custom function 1 is number of bracketed shots. By default, it's going to take 3 shots, and 3 shots is probably going to be enough for most people. But just to be safe, I usually like to shoot 5 shots. Another option you might want to see is the 7th one, exposure compensation auto cancel. So with 5 exposure set, now if I go into the auto exposure bracketing setting here and I change it, you can now see 5 little red lines. So it's going to be taking 5 shots, and that'll just give me more options, or it'll give the post-processing software a wider range of, a wider dynamic range to choose from. Once again, if you do decide that you want to use Adobe Lightroom, really helpful, go to sdp.io/Adobe deal, and you can, it's like $10 a month, at least in the US. Now let's talk about reviewing those pictures that we just took. Easy. Everybody knows this. There's a play icon here, and it shows you the last few pictures that you took. You can then flip through using the little directional pad here, or you can use your finger to just swipe through like this. And if you decide, let's scroll back a little bit. Oh, there's my selfie with Justin. The touchscreen is really useful here. You can pull in like this and just pull in and just make sure that stuff's in focus. You know what I mean? It's really easy to do it that way. You can also pull back and actually see thumbnails, making it easier to browse through and find your pictures. See, I took some pictures of Chelsea earlier. So, oh look, this one actually came out blurry. That's the reason that you might want to go in and chimp and actually zoom in. Really glad it has a touchscreen, because it makes that type of thing so easy. There are a bunch of different settings that you can choose when you're playing back images that can really help you out. The first is just to hit the info button here. Pushing this multiple times will iterate through different values. So you can see I can push it a couple of times, and now I can see the histogram there. The histogram tells me how bright or dark it is. You can also do that, see the histogram in live view mode. If you're not sure how to use a histogram, check chapter 3 in my book, Stunning Digital Photography. It's really important to understand that. There are some more settings that you can change that control the playback options. The first one here on camera, page 1, image review. By default, it's set to 2 seconds. So when you take a picture, it's going to show you that picture for 2 seconds. That burns some battery. It's also only 2 seconds, so it might not be enough for you to really review it. If I do want it to automatically review, I usually prefer 4 seconds. Or if I'm confident in my pictures and I don't want to burn through the extra battery required to show a picture for 4 seconds, I will simply turn it off. If you want it to stay up indefinitely, you can select hold down here. Another option that you might want to see is on the playback menu here. Go to page 3, and you can see highlight alert. I'm going to turn that on. And the reason highlight alert is useful is that it will tell you the parts of the picture that are overexposed. So here we are. They're also called blinkies. So this picture, besides being blurry, it's a little overexposed too. And you can see her forehead and parts of her face are blinking black and white. That means that it is losing detail in those parts of the picture, and I should adjust the exposure compensation down. I'll talk about exposure compensation in just a bit. Now, another way, if you are reviewing pictures and you want to turn that on or off, you can hit the Q button here, go down to highlight alert in the upper right corner here, and enable or disable it. Just a shortcut to do the exact same thing that you would do in the menu system. Another useful thing that you can do with the Q button is rating your pictures from 1 star to 5 stars. So sometimes you're out shooting, you get that great picture, but then by the time you get home, you've taken 1,000 pictures and you're like, oh man, I wish I could find that one picture. While you find it when you're out shooting, pull it up in the playback menu. This is a great picture. I'll hit the Q button. Now I'm going to hit the star icon here, and now you can see I can give it 5 stars. Now if I import it into the terrible Canon software or into Adobe Lightroom, it will have that 5-star rating, which means I could filter it by 5 stars and instantly find that picture. Now let's talk about using the camera's creative modes. These give you control over critical aspects of what the camera is doing. It allows you to blur the background, or show the background as completely sharp. It allows you to freeze motion or show motion blur, depending on what you, the photographer, decide. This is what separates somebody who uses fully auto from a creative photographer who knows how to manipulate the gear to express a vision. If you have no idea what aperture is, I'll give you a brief overview, but I have a whole free video at sdp.io/fstop, which goes into intense detail. First of all, the aperture describes the iris of the lens and how open it is. It's just like the iris of your eye, which opens in dim lighting or closes in bright light so you don't blind yourself. Big openings are low f-stop numbers. So f2 is a big opening, f32 is a small opening. You can think of it as a fraction. Like 1/2 is bigger than 1/32, right? At least for the math inclined. Besides letting in different amounts of light, it also changes the amount of background blur. So these pictures were taken with an 85mm lens. At f1.8, you can see the background is completely blurred. Creatively, this isolates the subject. The person looking at the picture looks only at Chelsea here and gets a sense for what's going on in the background, but maybe can't tell where it is or what's really happening. Choosing a higher f-stop number like f8 starts to show some detail. It tells some more of the context. It lets her know she's in an alley. I can see a building back there, but there might be a couple of people in the street. Using a high f-stop number like f32 puts everything in focus and allows you to more specifically know, oh, I actually know that alleyway. I can tell what model of car that is. It could be a distraction from the subject, the portrait, or it could be a key part of storytelling. Again, that's the job of you as the photographer to decide that. If you decide you want to control that f-stop, you're going to change the mode dial here over to AV. So push that button in here, switch it over to AV, and now let's pull up the info screen here. And now I can use the main dial here to change the f-stop. So in the back of the screen, we can see now it's at f2.8. I can go all the way to the right and go to f22. You can also see these values displayed on the 1980s LCD console here. If this is too dim for you, if it's not easy to see, you can hit this little light bulb here and it will light up. That'll make it easier to see at night. You can also preview the amount of depth of field that you'll get in real time by using the depth of field preview button. That button is located on the front of the camera in a very obscure place, right below the lens. You see that there? You might not even know that was there. Now, let's go into live view mode here and let's see. Okay, here we can see a little bit of the monitor and a little bit of the studio in the background. See how blurred the background is here? So you can see the monitor is sharp, the background here is blurry. If I go up to f22 and then press that depth of field preview button, bam, the background becomes sharp. So by pushing this button in live view mode, you can get a real-time preview of what the depth of field with the background blur is going to look like. You can also turn off live view mode, hold the viewfinder up to your eye and do the exact same thing and you'll get a real-time preview. But if you use the viewfinder, everything gets really dark. And the reason is the viewfinder is actually looking through the lens. So when you hit the depth of field preview and it gets really small, everything gets darker. The camera just compensates in live view. Now, if you have the lowest f-stop number, like f2.8, f4, f5.6, it varies depending on the lens. If you have that selected and you hit the depth of field preview button, you won't see any difference because it's shutting it down to whatever you've selected. But the camera, when you're using either live view or the viewfinder, it's always using the smallest f-stop number, regardless of what you're actually shooting at. So depth of field preview just tells the camera, hey, preview the f-stop number that I'm currently working with. Here's a practice for you. Right now, pause the video, grab your camera, and zoom, use your zoom lens, zoom all the way in to the longest focal length, and then get as close as you possibly can to something, but also show something else in the background. So focus as close as you can with something in the background, and then take pictures using the smallest f-stop number, a middle f-stop number, and a high f-stop number. And I bet if you scroll through those three pictures, you'll be able to see the difference in the background blur, the difference in the depth of field. Also, while you have that high f-stop number selected, hit that depth of field preview button so that you can see in real time the differences. Try that with both live view and the viewfinder so you can see how they perform in different conditions. Another variable that you might want to change besides aperture is the shutter speed. Shutter speed controls how long the shutter is open, how long the camera is capturing light for. Keeping it open for a long time gathers a whole bunch of light. Keeping it open for a very short amount of time freezes action, but doesn't gather as much light, resulting in generally kind of noisier images. You'll be balancing the opening of the aperture with how long the shutter is open to get pictures of proper exposure. The camera does that for you generally automatically. By choosing aperture priority, you tell the camera, I'm going to control the iris, the aperture, while you control the shutter speed. When you select shutter priority, you tell the camera, I want to control the shutter speed. You control the aperture to make up for whatever I'm doing with the shutter speed automatically. Really useful that way. The mode dial here, you'll set it to TV, time value, for shutter priority. Should be called S maybe. That's what other camera manufacturers do. TV is very much a Canon thing. If you want a detailed and free video showing you how to use shutter priority and different shutter speeds, visit sdp.io/shutter. But here are 3 examples. I'm sitting on one of those spinny things with my daughter, well, when she was like 5. At 1/8, you can see she's frozen because we're spinning at the same rate, and the background is completely blurred. At 1/30th, there's less blur, and at 1/125th, the background's pretty much frozen. I did all this just by using shutter priority and changing the shutter. Completely changed the story. At 1/125th, you don't know what's going on. She's spinning at the same pace, but you don't know it because she looks frozen. And this can happen accidentally if you, as a photographer, don't take charge of your camera settings. If you always use automatic mode, you'd probably end up with that because the camera would decide, oh, I need to freeze motion here. But you creatively decide how much motion blur you might want in a picture. So do this. I'm going to wave my hand like this. Set shutter priority and take pictures at 1/125th of a second, 1/15th of a second, and maybe half a second. And tell me what those pictures look like. You'll probably see more motion blur in the slower shutter speeds on my hand, but I bet when you get down to half a second, you'll probably also see some camera shake. Camera shake results because your hands are not perfectly still. You move a little bit while the shutter's open. The lens might have image stabilization that will try to compensate for that, but it is a very real thing that can ruin your pictures. So you're always kind of, when you are trying to use a slow shutter speed, you're also trying to mitigate this impact of camera shake. For detailed information about controlling camera shake, check chapter 4 in my book, 4 and 5 in my book, Stunning Digital Photography. Now, what if you want to control the iris and the shutter speed? You would go into manual mode. And it's not as scary as it sounds. I have a whole video that walks you through getting all your settings perfect for manual mode. It's free. Go to sdp.io/go manual. To select manual mode on this camera, go to your mode dial here, push the button in, twist it over to M for manual mode. Now, with shutter priority and aperture priority, you use the main dial here to change the shutter speed. In manual mode, the main dial will still change the shutter speed, but the rear dial here will change the aperture. So you're working this dial with your forefinger and this dial with your thumb. And if that's confusing to you, just remember you can always hit Q and just select that and then just drag it up or down to set it to whatever you like. But in the moment, you often have only a split second to get a picture. It's really good to get comfortable working with your forefinger and your thumb to set those manual settings. So go watch that Go Manual video, and then I want you to properly expose a picture in your room at f5.6 and then at f16, adjusting the shutter speed to compensate correctly and get yourself just a reasonable exposure. Bulb mode allows you to use really long shutter speeds. So while we're in manual mode here, if I keep moving the main dial left to select a slower and slower shutter speed, you'll see I can go all the way to 30 seconds. And then for some reason, it just stops. Why don't they let you scroll over to 10 minutes? I don't know. They don't. If you want to go longer than 30 seconds, you have to select a bulb mode on here. Bulb mode is indicated by the B on the mode dial. So now, it's actually telling me what it is. Now the shutter will stay open as long as I have my finger here on the shutter. So if I hold it down for 1 second, I get a 1 second exposure. If I hold it down for 20 minutes, I get a 20-minute exposure. but you probably don't want to stand there with your finger on the camera for 20 minutes because that would be boring. Good news, Canon gives you the option to control that interval. Hit the menu button, go to the camera icon, page 4, and then you'll see bulb timer here. Select enable, and now you can go to info detail set and set the actual length of the exposure. So now it's set to 3 minutes. I'll click OK. You would only do a 3-minute exposure if you were in like absolute darkness, like a moonlit night, and you were trying to get proper exposure. You wouldn't even need it in a city at night, but in just rural areas, you might actually want to do it. For detailed information, check chapter 11 in my book, Stunning Digital Photography. So I'm going to get out of bulb mode. I'm just going to go back to P mode for the sake of continuing all this. Oh, I know I just plugged my book. If you want to buy it, you can go to sdp.io/store. That goes to our store. We ship worldwide. You can get it ebooks for $10. We have books on stunning digital photography for photography, Lightroom, Photoshop, a whole book dedicated to picking the right camera gear, lenses, flashes, batteries, studio lighting, whatever you might want, and even a beginning video photography series. Don't take my word for it. Go to Amazon, look up Tony Northrup, Stunning Digital Photography, and check the reviews. You'll see over 1,000 reviews with an average 5-star rating. People really like it because it's not just a boring book. It has a ton of video built into it, more than 12 hours. So you could just watch the video if you're not a book person, or you could just read the book and not watch the videos. But for best results, you'll read some, you'll watch a little video that reinforces that, and then at the end of every chapter, you'll be able to take a little quiz, optional quiz, just to reinforce your knowledge. There's some practices in there, hands-on things you can do to reinforce that learning. And you even get access to a private Facebook group where you can go and post your own pictures and get feedback from myself, Chelsea, and other readers of the book who are super nice and in the same stages of learning. It's a great system, and if you're not happy with it, just send me an email and I'll give you your money back. Let's talk about the different shutter modes. Up until now, we've been working with single shutter mode. And in single shutter mode, you take a picture. Even if you hold the shutter down, it just takes one picture. But you can almost always benefit by taking multiple pictures, because we just talked about camera shake. Sometimes when you take one picture, it's shaky. And if you only took one picture, then your only picture is shaky. But if you take 5 pictures and the first one's shaky, maybe the second or third one isn't shaky and is nice and sharp, and that will often be the case. If you take one picture of a person, they might have their eyes closed. But if you take 3 pictures of a person, one of them is going to have their eyes open. So it's good to just take a couple of pictures whenever you are shooting. And for that reason, I pretty much always recommend using continuous shutter mode. To change the shutter mode, I think the easiest way is to hit the Q button here. Then go down to this little icon, tap it, and now you can pick from all the different shutter modes. High speed continuous is the fastest. With that selected, now I'll take pictures. You can see it's shooting continuously and taking lots of pictures. That's the mode I use almost all the time. There's also a quieter version of that, which is good if you're shooting a wedding, if you're in a church or a quiet concert or something. I'll show you the other way to change the shutter mode. On the top here, you'll see the drive button. You can push that, and then you can use the main dial here to change it. It does exactly the same thing. It just does it in a slightly different way. The quiet mode is, it has an S there for silent. So now in silent mode, it's barely quieter. It's real far from silent, okay? But it's a little quieter. I'll go back to using the back screen here, and I'll just show you the different delayed modes that you have here. Delayed modes are good for a couple of things. You know, it's a timer. So here you could set a 10-second timer. When you set that, you push a shutter button, and then you have 10 seconds to run from behind the tripod and go join your family and take that self-portrait that you've been working on, you know, like your parents did at Christmas time. Another option, which I think works better, is to, let's go back in there, do this self-timer continuous, and this will allow you to take multiple pictures all at once. So with self-timer continuous, I just set it to take 7 pictures. Now I can start it up, and it's going to beep. You can see it's counting down 10 seconds, and then it will take 7 pictures in a row. That's great for the reasons I just told you. You know, somebody's going to blink on that one picture. But if you take 7 pictures, one of them is bound to be better. than the others. If you do change over to one of the self-timer modes, make sure you set it back, because otherwise, the next time you pick up the camera, it's going to be waiting like 10 seconds, and that can be really annoying. There's also a 2-second timer mode here, and the 2-second timer is useful when you have the camera on a tripod, and you want to eliminate the tiny amount of shake that happens when you push the shutter button here. So for those cases, if you don't want to use a remote shutter trigger, use that 2-second timer. I'll do that if I'm doing night photography on a tripod. Let's talk about the different focusing modes. I have a whole video dedicated to this at sdp.io/focus. But by default, when you hold the camera up and you push the shutter button halfway, it finds focus and locks in. But if the subject moves, my camera's focus won't move. So if I'm trying to shoot a soccer player that's running at me, by the time I push the shutter all the way, they will have moved out of the plane of focus. So single focus doesn't work for those scenarios. Instead, you should be using continuous focus. Hit that Q button. In the left corner there, you see one shot. I'll select that, and now I can choose AI Servo. AI Servo, confusing name, right? It just means continuous. It means it's going to follow a moving subject. You can use AI Servo all the time on this camera. The focusing is good enough that even if it's a still subject, AI Servo will usually nail it. I will also point out, if you're hand holding the camera, you're always moving at least a little bit. And if you're taking a picture of a person, they tend to be moving a little bit. So one shot can miss focus, even though you think both things are still. The only time everything is really still is if you're taking a still life or a landscape and the camera's on a tripod. Otherwise, that little bit of wobble can definitely cause you to miss focus sometimes, and AI Servo can really help with that. But like I said, use continuous shooting and take a bunch of different pictures, because no camera's perfect. Every camera will miss focus sometimes. One shot is a little more precise, but there's that delay where things can move. AI Servo keeps up with moving subjects, but it misses sometimes, so you can easily compensate for that by snapping 4 or 5 pictures. Focusing points. By default, this camera will focus anywhere in the frame. And if you look through the viewfinder, what you'll see is, as you push the shutter button halfway, it might focus anywhere inside that box. I don't find that to be that useful. What I prefer instead is to use a single focus point, because I'm not going to let the camera decide where to focus. I'm the photographer. I'm going to pick where in the frame to focus. Okay, camera? So hit the Q button here, and then I can select this option here, Auto Selection AF. And I have all these different options here. Which I usually use is Spot AF. It's a very precise autofocus mode. And now that I've selected that, I can move the focusing point around like this. So for example, if you're taking a portrait, you always want to focus on the nearest eye. I would decide how I want the person to be in the frame and then move the focusing point to where their eye is, select that, and then focus on their eye, and then take the picture. A quicker way to change your focusing points is to hit this button here in the upper right corner. That brings up the same thing and just allows you to quickly change the focusing point like that. You can tune your autofocus. You shouldn't. Most people should not tune their autofocus. I wanted to tell you where it is so I could tell you not to do it, because the default autofocus I found works best in most situations. And when I've spent many hours trying to improve it by tuning it, I've only ever made it worse. But if you do want to tune it, hit the menu button. Go up to the little custom function thing here. It's under CFN2 autofocus, and you'll see all these options for tuning your autofocus. It is a rat hole. As soon as you start changing things, oh man, you're going to think for a second you got stuff better, but then it's going to be missing focus all the time. You'll just be like, oh, Tony told me not to do this, so I'm just going to reset everything. Manual focus. You can manually focus, you know, like your granddad did on his cameras. Switch the lens switch to manual focus there, and then you can turn the dial on the lens. Most lenses will have a zoom dial and a focusing dial here. Some lenses will have a distance estimator here that will tell you like how far you want to focus. That's useful. Sometimes I'm trying to be subtle and discreet, and I'll pre-focus my camera. If it's street photography and I want to just snap really quickly without taking the time to focus, I might switch to manual focus mode, and then I'll be like, oh man, he's like 10 feet away. So I'll pre-focus at 10 feet and then just take the picture. But that's not exact. because differences in humidity and temperature can change the way the optics work. So it's not exact, but it's can be good enough. Another setting you probably shouldn't change is metering modes. If you're an old school photographer, you probably learned about spot metering and center weighted metering and all that. Nowadays, I tell people just to use the default metering mode for all situations and then adjust it with exposure compensation as needed. But if you're old school and you want to be able to work with those metering modes, hit the Q button, hit this button right here, the middle and the lower row, and then you can select between the different metering modes. But this evaluated metering is pretty much better. If you don't know what that is, it's just how the camera decides how bright or dark the image should be by looking at the scene, different algorithms. But evaluated metering is the best. ISO is the camera's sensor sensitivity to light in sort of a virtual way. If you want to know everything about ISO, there's a free video, sdp.io/ISO, that will get real intense on you. So dive into it. I'm just going to show you how to actually change it. Once again, you can hit the Q button here, go up to the upper right corner, ISO, touch that, and now I can just scroll around. By default, your camera will come set to auto ISO, and I pretty much always leave it at auto ISO unless I'm shooting at night or in a studio. In those conditions, I will change it manually. High ISOs like ISO 25600 are great for really, really dark environments. Low ISOs like ISO 100 are good for in the studio or shooting in full sun. Low ISOs produce very clean images. High ISOs produce images with tons of noise, like little speckles, little red and green splotches everywhere, and they make really ugly pictures. So it's better to have lots of sunlight and be able to use low ISOs. The camera will generally pick the best ISO for the lighting conditions, which is why auto ISO works so well for you. The camera will also allow you to extend the ISO ranges that you can pick. So just now you saw the minimum ISO was ISO 100, but I can make it allow me to choose a lower ISO, ISO 50, which is actually pretty useful. So to do that, I'll hit the menu button here. I'll go to the camera icon, page 2, and now I can go down to ISO speed settings, the second option there. ISO speed range, I'll select that. I'll select the minimum and I'll go down to low, 50. And then for the maximum, I can select it and go up to high, 100,000. There's no reason not to do that. They might as well just turn it on when they ship the camera to you. So I'm also going to go into the auto range and allow it to select higher ISOs. That's fine. Just select those higher ISOs. If you've heard that those extended ISOs are not good, visit this URL, sdp.io/ISO50, where I have a free video that just shows you reasons that you might want to use those extended ISOs. Now let's talk about exposure compensation. The camera will look at a scene and decide what your aperture, shutter speed, ISO should be to properly expose it. So it's not too bright or too dark. If it gets it wrong, which it will sometimes, especially in like backlit scenarios, you take control. That's your job as the photographer. You got the brain. You're going to dial in exposure compensation. Let's go into live view here and I can just demonstrate real quickly what it's like. This dial here changes your exposure compensation. So if I dial to the left, everything gets dark. If I dial to the right, everything gets bright. This is what the camera thinks the exposure should be. But if I'm looking at that screen, I can see it's actually a little gray, right? Like to my eye, the screen looks white, but on this screen, it looks gray. In fact, if I hit the info button a couple of times, we can get a histogram up and you can see the right side of the histogram isn't touching the right side of the little screen display, which means nothing is actually white. So I can make it brighter. So it should look white, but it looks gray. You can see that in the histogram there. There's a gap on the right side of the histogram where it's just saying that instead of being white, it's actually gray. So I can make it brighter. Just pull that to the right. You can see down here, a little marker indicating how bright or dark it is. You'll see the same thing at the bottom of the viewfinder. The middle mark there means you're getting the camera's regular exposure. 1 means 1 stop brighter, twice as much light. 2 means 2 stops brighter, 4 times as much light. And 3 means 3 stops brighter, 8 times as much light. Just dial it in until it looks good. And then when you're done, go back and reset that to 0 so that you don't screw up your next pictures. If you want the camera to automatically reset the exposure compensation, which I recommend, hit the menu button, go to the custom settings here, go to CFN1 exposure, and then on page 7 here, you'll see exposure compensation auto cancel. set that to enable. There we go. So now if you, let's take a picture with 2 stops of exposure compensation, turn the camera off. Sometime later, I go to pick up my camera at a later point. You can see exposure compensation has reset to 0. Perfect. That means I'm not going to ruin my next picture because I forgot to set the exposure compensation. For detailed information about how exposure compensation works, check Chapter 4 in Stunning Digital Photography or watch the free video at sdp.io/EC. If you find exposure compensation doesn't work, this happened to me like 20 minutes ago. It's probably this lock dial. If it's locked like that, the exposure compensation dial won't work. It'll just ignore it. See, it says lock there. Push that down and now it'll work again. This happens all the time where I'm like, oh, my camera broke. I just have to remember, oh, this lock dial exists. Let's say you figured out aperture and shutter speed, and you figured out that when you're shooting sports indoors, you want to be at ISO 3200 and 1/250th of a second to freeze your kid's motion in our soccer game. Rather than having to go in and dial all those settings in for every different scenario, you can program a group of settings to C1 and C2. You can see those on the mode dial here. You see how if I turn this, push that button in and turn it, I have C1 and C2. That will automatically restore a group of settings that you've prepared previously. But first you have to prepare them. So let's pretend we're going to take pictures of soccer. I'm going to go into TV mode, shutter priority mode. I'm going to make sure that I have high speed continuous shooting on. That's set. I also want auto ISO, probably JPEG files, and let's go in and set the shutter speed to, let's call it 1/320th. That's pretty good for soccer. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the menu button. I'm going to go to the wrench icon, page 5, and then custom shooting modes. Register settings will save my current settings, and then I could pick from either C1 or C2. Custom shooting mode C1, okay. Now whatever settings I've dialed in are going to be saved to C1. So let's say I screw this up and I have it set to 1/3 of a second. All I need to do to go back to those settings is push this in and then go to C1. And we can see when we come back out, it's set back to 1/320th of a second. Perfect for shooting my kid's soccer game. That will save you a lot of time, especially if you really get into tweaking your settings. White balance, like metering, is something you don't ever need to change. The camera has auto white balance. That's usually the best thing to do. If it screws it up, it's easy to fix it afterwards, so you don't have to sweat it. But if you do want to change it because you're old school like that, hit that Q button. Go down to this. It'll say AWB by default for auto white balance. And then you can just pick the white balance that you want. You can see if you ever notice pictures turn out a little bit orange, if you shoot them under incandescent lights, or if on a cloudy day, they might be a little bit blue. That's the difference in white balance. Your brain fixes that for you, which is why incandescent lights don't always look orange, even though they really are a little bit orange. And the camera will fix it for you too, if you use auto white balance. But if you feel like you want to manually set it, that's how you do it. Mirror lockup is an option that I discuss in night photography and in macro photography and stunning digital photography. On this camera, it has live view, so you pretty much don't have to worry about it. You can get to it under camera 4 if you want to use mirror lockup, but for the most part, instead of using mirror lockup, just use live view. Live view locks the mirror up for you automatically. Then use a delayed shutter, like a 2-second delayed shutter, and you can take a picture and you'll get all the benefits of mirror lockup. If that means nothing to you, don't sweat it. You might get to it at some point, and just remember I told you, you don't have to use it. The SD card in the camera is your digital film, and eventually it will fill up, and you'll want to copy all your pictures on your computer, back those pictures up in the cloud somewhere using something like a cloud backup service, and then you can reformat it and reuse it an infinite number of times. To format the card, when you're absolutely sure you don't want any of the pictures on there, go into the menu icon, go to wrench, page 1, and then select format card, and then select OK, and it will format it for you. If you accidentally format your card, I get these panicked emails all the time. I accidentally formatted my memory card, also my pictures. Visit sdp.io/photorec for a free tool. Do not buy a tool. This tool is the free tool that does a perfectly good job. Then you can put your memory card into your computer, and it will scan it and restore all your pictures for you. Wi-Fi. You can transfer images from your camera to your smartphone wirelessly, allowing you to quickly share it on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, while you're out and about traveling. And in the Canon world, it actually works pretty well. the first thing that we're going to do is to go into our camera and turn on Wi-Fi. So I'll hit the menu button here, go to the wrench icon, page 1, and the last option is wireless communication settings. Let's go into Wi-Fi settings. We'll select enable, and then go back one, and we're going to go down to Wi-Fi function, and we're going to connect to smartphone. Now you can see the option for register a device for connection. We'll select that, and it's prompting you to install Canon Camera Connect, which is a smartphone app, and you can display a QR code for the download site. You don't need to do that. I'm just going to show you how to find the app. So I'll select do not display, and you can see now what's happening is waiting for connect. This camera has now become its own wireless access point. It doesn't go to the internet, but it is waiting for something to connect to its wireless access point to share pictures with it. So we'll leave that on. Then we'll grab our smartphone, Android or iOS, open up the App Store, and let's search for Canon. And it's the Canon Camera Connect app. Notice that it had 2.5 stars, which means it's not a very good app. So with Canon Camera Connect running, what I will do now is connect to that Wi-Fi network. On an iPhone, you'll go to Settings, Wi-Fi, and then it should appear in this list. On an Android, you can just swipe up and hold down the Wi-Fi icon, and it will usually prompt you. You can see EOS 62, this long thing here, is my wireless access point. So I'll select that, and it will prompt me to enter the password, which is shown on the back of the screen here. And now you can see the camera recognizes that somebody has connected to the wireless access point. My phone here is connected to the wireless access point, so I'll switch over to Camera Connect. I just double tap the home button on an iPhone to switch. And it says new camera found, Canon 6D Mark II, yay. So I'll select that. The camera is now prompting me, okay, do you actually want to connect to this iPhone, just in case there was some rogue iPhone? So I'll select okay. Connection established, yay. I think the easiest thing to do is to set the camera down at this point and just work with the smartphone. You can see you can choose images on camera to transfer pictures to your smartphone, or remote live view shooting if you want to remotely control your camera. For now, let's just click images on camera, and we can browse through all the various pictures that I took during the course of this tutorial. So I'll pick that, and then if I want to, I could, add some number of stars to it. You can see it already had 5 stars because I did that earlier. I could click that to save it to my smartphone. It gives me the option to resize the image to make it smaller, just easier for sharing. But generally, I don't resize pictures. So I'll select that and then use these settings from now on and click OK. So now you can see it's saving the image. Now I could go into Instagram here, and if I add a picture, there it is. That's how easy it is to get it from your camera to your phone to Instagram. So let's go back to Camera Connect here. Now we'll look at the remote live view shooting. I can touch the screen to focus, and if I turn it sideways, you can see I can get just a different view of everything. I can see in real time, you can see as I move the camera around, it shows it, and push the shutter button to actually take a picture. I could change whether it's continuous or on a delay. I can hide those settings. I can change touch autofocus. It's in shutter priority mode, so I could change the shutter speed here. I could add exposure compensation to make it brighter or darker. So just about anything you could do from the camera, you can do remotely in a situation like this. And sometimes this can be useful if you want to take a picture of yourself, because you could put it on a tripod and then make sure that the picture's composed carefully, and then take a picture like that. You could even set it for a 2-second delay so that you could push the button and then hide your smartphone. Basically, it's like a free remote that came with your camera. Overall, it works pretty well. Thanks, Canon, for giving us a decent Wi-Fi app. Now I'm going to go over a couple of recommended settings that I like on my 6D Mark II. The first is to turn off that beep. Please turn off the beep, especially if you're going to a wedding or something. Nothing worse than being a wedding photographer and having everybody in the audience be like, beep, 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 beep. Like, okay, you don't need to notify everybody around you that you've achieved focus. It's not that big of a deal. I'll hit the menu button, go to the wrench icon, go over to page 4, and then the second option down is beep, disable. Thank you. I'm also going to show you how to shoot RAW. If you don't know the difference between RAW and JPEG, visit sdp.io/rawvjpeg for a free video. Or you can read Chapter 4 in Stunning Digital Photography, where I just explain it much more easily. To switch into RAW mode, hit the menu button here, go to camera page 1, and then you'll see the very first option. That's how important this is. They made it the first option in the whole menu system. Select that, and now we can select RAW and turn JPEG off. And if you're using an app like Adobe Lightroom, which can greatly improve your images and make them easier to organize, then I would definitely be shooting RAW from day one. Back button focus is a more advanced technique, but if you're doing night photography, macro photography, if you're shooting sports or you're switching between any of those different things, wildlife, back button focus can really change how you shoot and make you a quicker and more effective photographer by allowing you to instantly switch between single focus, manual focus, and continuous autofocus just by moving your thumb like that. For a detailed explanation of why back button focus is meaningful, watch this free video at sdp.io/YBB. In the meantime, if you decide you want to turn it on, hit the menu button here, go to the custom function settings, it's custom function 3, and then on page 4, you'll scroll through over to page 4, you'll select that, and what we're going to do now is we're going to decouple focusing from the shutter button. So this first option here is for the shutter button. Right now, see it says metering end AF. We're going to change it to just metering. Therefore, pushing the shutter button halfway no longer focuses. The only other setting you need to check on that page is the AF on button here. That's this button here. So we'll set that and make sure it just shows AF and metering. So with those two options set, when I push the shutter button halfway, it does not autofocus. You can see it's not trying to autofocus. If I want to autofocus it, I use my thumb, and then it locks in focus. The shutter button is now just for taking pictures. So when you use back button focus, you're coordinating your thumb, which controls focusing, and your forefinger, which controls actually taking pictures, and using those two together instead of putting both tasks on a single finger. Because there are times when you don't want to autofocus every time. Not when you first start shooting, but as you get more advanced, you will really appreciate that. Just wanted to show you where it was. Once again, that link will show you why it's meaningful. We've been digging through the menus a lot today. You are going to be accessing some of those menus regularly, and most of them never at all. So for those things that you access regularly, rather than digging through all the many pages of menus, I suggest you add them to the very convenient shortcut here, My Menu. My Menu is the star icon here. And you can add tabs, and then you can add multiple items per tab. But for most people, a single menu, one tab is going to be enough. So I'm going to add that tab, and then I'm going to select Configure, and then I'm going to select items to register to this tab. And now what I can do is I can go through all the menus in the entire camera and pick the ones that I use most frequently, like interval timer is one I use a lot. So I'll select that. And then bulb timer is one I use a lot. So I'll select that. Sound recording is something I change when I'm recording video. So now I have 3 menu items registered. I can go back here. So now as I'm flipping through the menu items, I can go over to the star icon here, and you can see those 3 menu items that I just selected, interval timer, bulb timer, sound recording, all on my menu. That saves so much time over going through page after page, because you will forget whether it's under the camera icon or the wrench icon or whatever. All the stuff you use, cram it under My Menu, and you will save yourself so much time. I also want to give you a tip to set the copyright information in your camera. At least in the US, when you take a picture, it's automatically copyright, no matter what you do. But you can put your name in the metadata of the picture, and that can be meaningful. First, it's a nice kind of automatic thing. If somebody else unloads your pictures onto their camera, it'll say copyright Tony Northrup or whatever your name is. But I like to set it because if I lose my camera, somebody could theoretically look at that copyright information and know who the camera belonged to. To set the copyright information, hit the menu button, go to the wrench icon, page 5, and then halfway down you'll see copyright information. Select that, and you can edit the author's name. Then you can just type your name in here. And then you can also edit the copyright details, which this might be a good place to put in your email address or your phone number. I usually just put my email address in on the slim chance that somebody will find my camera, find that, and then want to return it to me. I'm going to go through some lens and software suggestions. I've already suggested Adobe Lightroom and Photoshop. That's what 98% of the photographers I know use to organize and process their pictures. Whether you're a pro or an amateur, it handles it all for you. Lightroom's quite easy to use. You can get it for $10 a month, which is an incredible deal for the software at sdp.io/Adobe deal. And if you are feeling overwhelmed by all that software, you can get my book, my Lightroom book here. Look up Tony Northrup Lightroom on Amazon, and you'll see that it has good reviews, and it has 14 hours of video tutorials, and it will show you how to use every aspect of Adobe Lightroom. Now I'm going to go over some lens suggestions, perfect for the Canon 60 Mark II, in case you're looking to spend some money. The first is a cheap option, $125 for Canon's Nifty 50, the fantastic plastic 50mm f1.8. This is a prime lens, it's not a zoom lens, and it's not a high quality lens. It's only $100, but what it does is allow you to really get background blur. So if you, whatever kit lens you come with, it's probably f4, maybe it's f2.8, but either way, it's not going to be able to blur the background distinctly to get that kind of bokeh effect. This lens will, and it's pretty cheap. So if you want to experiment with background blur, pick this up at sdp.io/c50stm. The link's down here, affiliate links. The general kit lens that I like the best for this camera is not a Canon lens, but a Sigma lens. Sigma is a third-party lens manufacturer that makes, their art lenses are better than Canon lenses. Genuinely, they make amazing quality lenses. My favorite general use lens for this camera is the Sigma 24-105 f4, which you can pick it up at sdp.io/s105. So if you bought the kit, when I've done that in the past, I will sell the lens on eBay or something and then buy this. It is noticeably sharper, noticeably brighter, which means you'll be using a lower ISO and getting cleaner images, and it's extremely versatile. It's just a good all-in-one lens. If you want sharper results, the lens I have on the body here is the Canon 24-70 f2.8. This is their like pro wedding, event, journalism lens, and it's a beast. It's super durable. It's one of the sharpest lenses I've ever used, especially for a zoom. It's also super expensive, and it's not stabilized. So especially in lower light, you might end up getting some shaky pictures. That's why the Sigma is better for general use. But for things like events, or if you're a pro and you're really carefully managing your camera shake, it's the right choice for you. Check out sdp.io/c2470 for that excellent, excellent lens. If you find that 24mm isn't wide enough, if you want to zoom back further, maybe you're shooting events in a really crowded room, or you're walking through the streets of Rome or small European cities where you just can't take another step back because there's another building there and you just want to be able to shoot wider landscapes. My favorite general landscape lens is the Canon 16-35 f4. It is stabilized, so it will pretty much eliminate handshake in any conditions. It's pretty sharp and it's a pretty good price. It's just an all-around great lens at sdp.io/c16. If that's not wide enough, if you want to go super, super ridiculously wide, Canon makes a much more expensive 11-24 f4 lens, which is sharper. It's a better lens, but it doesn't have that stabilization. So if you were hand holding it in low light, you might get some shaky pictures. And of course, it's super expensive. sdp.io/c11 if you want the ultimate super wide angle landscape lens. Let's get into portraits. The lens that I have here is the Canon 70-200 f2.8, and that lens there is more than a decade old because it's just been a workhorse. It's what we've done all our weddings and portraits and commercial photography on. It's fantastic, and it's not that expensive nowadays. It's not a perfect lens. There are third-party alternatives that are a little bit sharper, have a little less chromatic aberration, a little better contrast or whatever. But overall, this is my favorite for its durability and its good zoom range, even working close-up. Other lenses have focus breathing. Visit sdp.io/c200 to check that out. You can use teleconverters that will let you get a little more reach out of your 70-200. That's perfect if you're shooting sports and you find even at 200mm you're not getting close enough, which is super common with just about all sports. Start with the 1.4 times teleconverter at sdp.io/c14x. And if you're shooting wildlife or some really distant sports, you can jump up to the 2 times teleconverter. If you're a real sports freak and you have big budget, check out Canon's 200-400mm f4 lens. It's incredibly sharp and it has a built-in teleconverter, but it's also incredibly expensive. For wildlife, my budget option here is Canon's 400mm f5.6 prime lens. It's a fantastic lens, and this lens is at least a decade old too. We've been shooting with it forever, but it will produce pro quality results that you will not get out of any zoom lens. So everybody tries to use zooms for wildlife, but they will, and then they complain that their images aren't quite sharp. This will give you sharp results. You still need to get close, but it will work better than anything else. sdp.io/c400. I bought that one used. You can pick one up used too. They go for like $750, but the results with wildlife will blow your mind. If you insist on a zoom or if you need image stabilization with that, which that lens lacks, the Canon 100-400 Mark II is a good lens. It's not as sharp as that at 400 millimeters, so it's not as good for wildlife, but it's a zoom, so it's more versatile. You can pick it up at C100, 400 too. Finally, if you have $13,000 and you're really into wildlife, get Canon 600 millimeter f4 because it's unbeaten, even in other camera makers lineups, Canon, Sony, Nikon, Sony, nobody has an f4 600 millimeter like that. A lot of people, when they buy a lens, they immediately go out and buy a bunch of filters for it. I have a video that can save you hundreds of dollars for each lens. Check it out at sdp.io/nofilter. If you need a tripod, I'm going to give you 3 different options for different purposes, different price points. If you just blew all your money on a new 6D Mark II and you want the cheapest possible tripod, this Dolica tripod will get the job done for $50. sdp.io/tripod1. It's a good, well-rounded tripod. For the ultimate travel tripod, we've tested a bunch, and our favorite is the Manfrotto Be-Free tripod. It folds up really small, and yet it's nice and sturdy, easy to use, and very dependable. sdp.io/befree. And for a more heavy-duty, general-use, non-travel tripod, it's sturdier. It's more stable than a travel tripod would be, but it's also bulkier. Pick up this incredibly long-named Manfrotto tripod at sdp.io/mk190. If you want a flash, Canon's flashes are outrageously overpriced and underfeatured. Third-party flashes are vastly better. My favorite flash right now is this Godox flash. You can pick up the V860 Mark II at sdp.io/V860C. It has a special battery in it that will blow away all the AA flashes that you use. And our favorite studio lights now are also made by Godox, which means they can be remotely controlled with the same system, meaning I can mix that flash and studio lights or kind of grow from one to another. My favorite strobes are sdp.io/FPC. They're labeled either Flashpoint or Godox, but they're the same strobes. Thanks for watching. I've shown you how to how to use your camera, but this is like telling somebody how to drive a car. You know what I mean? I could tell you, oh, push the gas, turn the wheel like this, and go down traffic. They would die, right? And you will die with your camera if all you know how to do is to push the buttons, because photography is an art form. Sure, it's mildly technical, but the artistic part of it is 98% of the challenge. And that's what I teach you in my book, Stunning Digital Photography, which I've hidden. Here it is, Stunning Digital Photography. We'll walk you through the art and the science of photography. Of course, I will teach you the camera settings too, but I'll also teach you composition, mood, lighting, planning, posing, and those things are going to make the biggest difference in your photography. I'd rather have you learn the art and use your smartphone than use a full-size camera here without appreciating the depth of photography. I cover wildlife, sports, landscape, just about everything that you can imagine. Night photography, insects, underwater photography. I got it all in there. I also have books on Lightroom, Photoshop, and my photography buying guide. You can pick them all up at our store where we ship directly worldwide at sdp.io/store, or just go to Amazon and search for Tony Northrup and check out the reviews because they're pretty good. If you have any questions, follow-up tips, add a comment down below. Give us a like, share it with your friends, and of course, subscribe for more free videos because we put out at least 3 videos a week. Entertaining, fun, and educational. Bye.